The unique things about sort of doing a song like that is it's popular. If you listen to Christian radio right now, you'll hear that song. And one of the advantages of that is when you have a granddaughter who gets any tune in her head, well, you're going to hear it a lot. And she recognizes those songs, picks them up. And so when I'm playing Christian radio, sometimes she just jumps right in and starts singing. And woe unto me if well, that's a nice thing now. Woe unto me if I decide to think about changing the station. She's getting now where she's old enough. I command such power. Thank you. You'd like to take the other one too? She's got to where she gets to be in the front seat. She told me about her weight. It's the only time I'll ever hear her talk about how glad she was to gain weight. But she loves to sing those Christian songs. The trend today is toward humanizing the non-human. Think about that for a moment. Humanizing the non-human. Consumers love it. Amazon's Alexa is a disc-shaped object. You're going to see a picture, and that's the little version of that Echo. Americans turn first thing in the morning usually to Alexa. They ask Alexa to tell them the weather, to play them a song, to give them even a recipe for dinner. How many of you have Alexa in your home? You crazy bunch of people. Some children now see it as a wide range of objects, living things. They just kind of bring that over to the things that are not living. Matter of fact, one app developer reports that Alexa, because of this, and if you've experienced that with your grandkids, I mean, the first time Holden heard us talk to Alexa, he just stood there and looked at that thing, and then he went over there and started talking to it. Of course, you have to begin Alexa, and he couldn't get her to respond to his Alexa, but he began immediately transferring that from an unliving, a thing, to a human thing. The trend today is to humanize the non-human. A little boy, once he saw this happening, one day finally decided he was going to pick up the coaster off of the coffee table and start talking to it, and he did. I've recently learned that you can even have certain lights in your car, the front of your car, that will either be aggressive or friendly. Now, I did a purview of that. I found aggressive, but I didn't find too many happy lights. But aggressive lights, you know, they're narrow and they're pointed, and you got this grill, and, you know, you pull up behind somebody, and, well, you're aggressive. You might think it kind of strange to attribute those human qualities to non-human objects, but I'm going to ask you, I will not ask you to name what you have named that is not human. But how many of you have done that in your life? I had a truck that we called Big Red. Now, Buck knows about this because he drove it. Matter of fact, he tore an engine up out of it. I've never forgiven him for it. But Big Red was not big at all. Big Red was about this big, as I remember. But I found it was filled with rust, and I found it in Nashville and got a great deal on it. When I brought it home, my wife was so proud of me. She just loved the fact that we were going to put this rusted hunk of metal in our driveway. But the real miracle is it drove all the way from Nashville to northern Kentucky. When we got here, my wife prayed that it would not, but it did, and we got it here. The trend today is toward humanizing the inhuman. Maybe you remember the movie Her, in which a lonely man, you're going to see a picture of him at his computer there. And by the way, it's a weird movie. I did not go to the movie. I did not pay money for this, but it was on one night, and I began to watch it. But if your star is Joaquin Phoenix, well, you know it's going to be a little nuts, and so he is the star. But he develops a relationship with a talking operating system. Theodore is his name, and he's a lonely man. He's in the final stages of his divorce, and sure enough, when he's not letter writing, which is what he does for a living, he spends his time with video games and his new OS1, and that is his new operating system 1, which has been advertised as the world's first artificially intelligent operating system. Matter of fact, the ad for this particular operating system says it's not just an operating system, it is consciousness. And so the story is this lonely, lonely man falls in love with the voice of this woman who is on his computer. And as an OS, Samantha is her name. She is a powerful intelligence that helps Theodore to help himself in many ways, although you can imagine it becomes even more than a little bit weird. Research is showing that people who feel isolated more attribute consciousness to their gadgets. Perhaps loneliness is a major part of that. At times, it even gets really bizarre. I won't go into pictures and things that I looked up this week, but the National Geographic reports that a man in Washington State has an emotional and romantic relationship to his car named Vanilla. In Germany, there is a person who appears to have an ongoing, loving relationship with the Berlin Wall. The trend today is toward humanizing the non-human. Clearly, there is a danger in doing that. There is a major danger in doing that. We don't want our children to become adults who talk to coasters and who fall in love with walls. And so there's even a bigger danger, though, when you flip that around, and that's where we're going to land today. We begin to treat humans as objects that satisfy our personal desires and our agendas. Today's story may well be one of the saddest in all the Bible. Now, if you've heard it, and if you've been in church any time, you've heard this. But we almost always jump over to Psalm 51, where we're seeing David, we believe, cry out to God for forgiveness. We don't want to linger too much on what is the most difficult story, I think, maybe to read in the Bible. But we do today. It's 2 Samuel 11, 1 through 15. In the spring at the time when kings go off to war, make note of that. David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army, and they destroyed the Ammonites and they besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of his palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man says she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. Make note of that. She came to him. She did not have a choice, by the way, and she slept with him. Women were property at this point. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, I am pregnant. So David sent this word to Joab. Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was and how the soldiers were and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. Make note of that. And David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? And Uriah said to David, the ark and the Israel and Judah are staying in the tents. And my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How can I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. And David said to him, stay here one more day. Tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next, and at David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. In the morning, David wrote, the saddest letter of his life. He wrote a letter to Joab, and he sent it with Uriah. And he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw him from him so he will be struck down and die." David and Bathsheba. Long before the movie Her, King David saw Bathsheba as an object. He didn't really perceive her as a human being when you think about it, but as a thing that could respond to him and give him pleasure. She was his own personal Alexa. David's problem began in the spring of the year, at least that's what we understand here, and that's when kings go out, it told us. But instead of doing his job and leading his soldiers, David remains in the comfort and the safety of the capital city, Jerusalem. So he sends his captain, Joab, along with his other officers to lead the army against the Ammonites. And late one afternoon, he lazily gets up from a nap, and there he finds across the way a woman who is bathing. And he likes what he sees, like a car buyer spotting a car with a grill that's upturned into a smooth smile or maybe an angry glare, but one that they like. David sends a message to inquire about the woman and receives a report. She is, in fact, Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, make note of this. She was not an object because she was connected to other people, but he continued to perceive that she was an object. So Bathsheba is a flesh and blood human being. She is the daughter of somebody, you know. She belongs to somebody in a marriage arrangement. But what is very clear from the report is that Bathsheba is off limits. She's already been taken. She is the daughter of someone. But to him, objects are to be used. He probably sees Uriah as a kind of car with slanted and narrowed headlights, valued for his aggressiveness, and that's why he wants to send him into battle. David, if he lived today, might well be saying, "Alexa, give me a recipe for personal pleasure." And so maybe he would have realized that there are consequences to all of our actions, either here or in the hereafter. And then we get to that fatal verse, number 5, where it says, "I am pregnant." Although he had been treating her like an object of desire, Bathsheba is clearly a human being who, in fact, can be in the midst of the miracle of conception and birth, and there it was, right there in front of him. But King David fails to open his eyes to the truth. Instead, he continues to treat people like objects. "Send me Uriah the Hittite," he says to Captain Joab. You know the story. We walked through it a moment ago. It is sad, sad, and sad. And Uriah is a human being. He's not a computer operating system. He does something that David does not do. He follows his conscience. And he will not go home and be with his wife because he is in command. He is a fighter. He is a part of a battle. And so he says, "No, I must remain true to my conscience," and he will not go home. Uriah the Hittite turns out to be more honorable than David the king. What a fine human being he is, but once again, David is not moved. Notice that David had several chances to turn his life around. Several chances in this story where the mirror is placed right in front of him, but he cannot see himself for who he is. And then he plans that sick plan. Joab follows David's orders, and Uriah is killed on the battlefield. But let's move to the next point where we're going to spend a bunch of our time that we have left. David's abuse is a chilling warning to us. David's treatment of Bathsheba and Uriah is chilling because the deadly danger of seeing humans as objects that satisfy our personal desires and our personal agendas, instead of respecting Bathsheba as a woman And as a wife, David sees her as an attractive object designed to give him pleasure. Instead of honoring Uriah as a soldier and as a husband, David, in fact, disposes of him as if he was simply another annoying, throwaway object. And this is the story that packs an emotional punch as it shows the great harm that, in fact, can be done when we treat people as objects instead of human beings. Now, for those of you who wonder, I am preaching according to the lectionary right now. We've been in and around this story. I didn't know that we were going to go back to it until I looked at the lectionary preaching. And so I did not pick this passage to preach, it picked me. I have choices about, there's an Old Testament and a New Testament, but this one picked me. Why? Well, if you live today, you know why, don't you? Over the past year, it has become clear that King David is not alone in his particular sin. The names Harvey Weinstein or Charlie Rose or Matt Lauer or Louis C.K. or Kevin Spacey or Bill O'Reilly, do any of those names sound familiar to you? Of course they do. No matter where you are in the political spectrum, let's just get that out of the way, there are liberals in that list and there are conservatives in that list. But they all have been accused of sexual misconduct. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember, did any of you ever watch television and think for one moment that Bill Cosby may one day, after being accused of at least convicted of 3 counts of felony sexual assault, that he is likely in the next however many months to be informally classified as a sexually violent predator? What world do we live in? All of these folks have treated women and men as though they were objects designed to give them pleasure. So, of course, you and I can look at those and say, oh, that's bad. And know that we don't ever do anything like that, or at least if we do, it's much reduced. I had a man stand with me in the back of the sanctuary last week. He was visiting our church. And we stood there for a long time because he needed to talk about how he had fought his way through an addiction to pornography. He needed to talk to somebody about the fact that he had gotten free from it and been free for several years now. But he asked me then, he says, do you ever speak to that? And I said, well, you weren't here a couple of weeks ago when we talked about a little bit about the very issue of pornography. But let me go through some personal observations as this scripture preached to me. Maybe we befriend a fellow student who can help us pass a test. Maybe we hire an immigrant day laborer so we can pay them cheaper hourly rate. Maybe we get associated with wealthy people so that they can help us to enjoy expensive things. Or maybe we keep our employees at part-time so we don't have to pay their health insurance. All those are things that we can bump into wherever we go, where we find ourselves treating human beings as objects. It can happen to all of us, and it's not limited to the world of sexual misconduct. And then I bumped into this verse. I'm sure I've read it before, but when you read certain scriptures, they just kind of take you apart. And this is one of them. It's from Isaiah, as you might expect, 59. He was a prophet. He spoke to every issue. He did not have a political persuasion or party. He just spoke. And it's Isaiah 59. It says, no one brings suit justly. No one goes to law honestly. They rely on empty pleas. They speak lies, conceiving mischief and begetting iniquity. But here comes the good part. Justice is turned back and righteousness stands at a distance. For truth stumbles in the public square and uprightness cannot enter. When you do what I do for a living, you always stand with one foot in the pastoral and one foot in the prophetic. Everybody, almost everybody, loves when I'm pastoral. But lots of people don't like it when I'm prophetic. They say, don't get political. Well, this isn't political. This is the gospel. David's rape of Bathsheba and his clumsy attempts to cover it up are an example of truth stumbling in the public square. But let me give you some other examples. Dare I pause to mention this in light of the world in which we live now that I never thought I would see, where people are being treated as they're being treated. Let me simply say, we have slowly moved from calling people unauthorized or undocumented immigrants. Notice that term is not used. That's a person in that one. We now are calling them illegal aliens. It's easier to talk about aliens than it is persons. Folks, I don't have a political dog to fight in this battle, but we cannot separate children from their parents. These folks who cross are not criminals. They only become criminals when they go to court, and I understand the difficulty. What's the average wait for immigration court? 404 days. I don't care if Congress can't get their act together. At least the president said we can't do this anymore. We cannot be a nation who says anywhere on our money that we trust in God and treat children this way. Do their moms and dads lie? Absolutely. I've had so many people tell me, Dan, well, if you're here, you get separated from your family. Oh, yeah, but you do know where they are. You can visit them. But Dan, they're criminals. Well, I talked to an immigration attorney. They're not. They're seeking asylum. Do some of them lie about that? Absolutely. Some of them bad people? Absolutely. But we cannot treat our children as objects. Dare I pause to mention, in light of the denominational world that you and I live in right now, not this political world, how about the denominational world? Some of you may not be aware of this, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but we now are part of a denomination that is telling us we can't associate with certain associations. By that I mean we are duly associated with the Kentucky Baptist Convention and the Cooperative Baptist Convention. And now the Kentucky Baptist Convention is telling us, because we are duly aligned, that we can no longer be a part of the Kentucky Baptist Convention because we associate with the Cooperative Baptist Convention. That they will drop us from them if we do that. They're trying to scare us off from contributing to the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. Because the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship has changed their stand just a little bit about how they perceive gay people. Well, folks, my view about that whole thing hasn't changed because I've always said I love people. And I don't check people's sexual preference at the door. I try to gauge them where they are, and I try to walk with them faithfully. But I sure don't want a denomination telling us that we can't even associate with another bunch of good Baptists because they're associated with some of those you-knows. So let's get down to where it really is. Fortunately, there's a simple formula. Love people, not things. Use things, not people. Let me kind of pull this together. See everyone. See everyone. Why am I feeling stirred? I got a call this week that a young man who grew up, he came to this nation at 14 with his parents. I don't know all about his legal issues, immigration. But he attended school in Scott County, and he went to church in Georgetown. And so the Georgetown churches had loved and nurtured this young man for 4 years, 14 to 18 years old, finished school, trying to get ready to go to college. He always went to his ICE meetings. He always did whatever they had asked him to do. He was doing whatever he needed to do. You know, he was a good kid from all indications for the people that knew him and loved him in Georgetown. They said, well, he went to his ICE meeting on Friday or something, and he didn't come home. And they've moved into the Boone County Jail, so I decided to go out there. By the way, that's the whole going to the jail system in this area is hogwash. And I've got a better name for it, but I'll wait till after church to tell you that. It's difficult, and it should not be. And if any of our officials are listening, I'd love to talk to you about it. But you have to jump through hoops and spit nickels to get in these places, and it shouldn't be like that. But all that aside, we pastors had heard of this. We went out to try to see him. By the time they would let us get there, they had shipped him into Indiana, and by the time we found out about that, they had shipped him to Chicago. Now, if he gets shipped out, he cannot return to this country for 10 years. And yet, most of his life as a mature young man was spent here. Now, I don't know about, again, all the status, I don't know about all that, but I know one thing, he's never done anything wrong. There's something wrong with how we treat people, and we got to do better. And so whatever your political persuasion or all that stuff, just please keep your heart beating your Christian faith. See everyone as a precious child of God. Respect them as daughters and wives and sons and husbands and mothers and fathers and loyal workers and faithful Christians. Love them as Christ loved them. Just as I've loved you, it says, you also have loved one another. If you want a reminder of that, go serve food to the homeless. We did that again on Friday night, and as we expected, the groups, usually there's 40 to, or so, 50, and this time it was probably 80, 90. But boy, the look in their faces, first of all, it's rare to get them to look you right in the eye. But you just need to live. Because most of those people are dealing with a whole layer of mental illness. They're dealing with a whole layer of incompetency and a whole layer of stuff. But from that group, from the ministry of the Lord's Gym, I think they said 70 or 80, I forget the number, they had gotten jobs, full-time jobs, this past year so far. That ministry is doing that kind of thing. So, I want us to love people, not things. And if that wasn't enough, I read the story about the giant killer orca whale. Anybody read this story? Yeah. There's a giant killer orca whale carrying around a baby whale. It's called a calf. Now get this. Never known it in all of history, those that follow these kind of things, ever to happen. But this orca killer whale is going around, and it will flip that calf off, and it will sink, and it will go down and pick that calf back up and bring it to the surface. And what they're saying is, this orca killer whale is grieving the loss of this calf. I read that and I went, Lord, have mercy on us. A whale can have more empathy than some humans. I hope you have received this challenge as a loving challenge, that we can be better, that we can be salt, that we can be light in a world that wants to take sides. I am so tired of sides. I'd personally like to go down to Congress and whoop them. I mean, I'd take on both sides. They just can't get anything done for us. Anyway, today, my call to you is to be salt and to be light. Not to point toward it. Jesus didn't say, oh, I will light a little candle and you can carry it around as much as we say that. It says you are the light. You are the light. And so in a world that's very confusing, a world that wants to pick sides, a world that wants to do all this pushing back and forth, I want to be together and I want to walk through life together and I want to deal with this kind of stuff redemptively. Not pushing people away, but holding on to them and walking with them. Let's pray together. Father, help us to be church. Help us to be church. Stir us deeply. Lead us strongly. And make us yours. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.